All right. Our tweeted question was how do we deal with individuals who dismiss Christianity as absurd?
Nobody who's intellectually honest can say that. It's just dishonest. So whenever somebody says, you can say I don't think it's, at the end of the day I don't think it's true, that's fair. But the claim that it's absurd is just dishonest, because you have some of the leading university professors in the world are believing Christians, and they're not believing stuff that's absurd. They may be wrong, but that's a different point. So when somebody says that, I automatically think something's going on here. And so I will often start by saying, well, would you like for Christianity to be true? Is that something you'd like? Would you like for there to be a God? And a lot of times they'll say, well, no, I really wouldn't. And then I will say, well, would you be comfortable in probing that? Because I wonder if there's something going on that might be driving you to your conclusions that is different than just the intellectual issues. So that's the first thing that I'll say. Then I might say, well, tell me, can you be specific as to what you think is absurd about it? And then ask them to be specific about it. Don't let them just be general, and then try to take it issue by issue. One of the things that you might want to ask them is, where do you think the world came from? It had to come from somewhere. We know it had a beginning. Where did it come from? Things like that. So if I start off with, would you like for Christianity to be true, or for there to be a God? Is that something that you at least wish were true? And if you think it's absurd, then what are your specifically why? And then if I can't answer your questions, I'll go find somebody who can, and I'll come back to you a week later with some answers. One final thing that you might say, and then I'll come up to the mics if you want, if you'd like to ask a question, is I might say to somebody, can you tell me what you've read on the question? Who have you read on the other side? And a lot of times you won't get an answer for that. Yes, my friend.
How do you deal with the issue of borrowed capital?
Of what?
Borrowed capital. A lot of atheists presume objective morality and argue, like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens when he was alive. One of them said words to the effect that they'd rather not, if anybody disbelieves in evolution or something like that, or neo-Darwinian synthesis or whatever, that they are either I forget, something or evil.
Yes.
So how do you deal with the fact that they're relying upon an objective moral?
Well, this is an important point, because sometimes people use borrowed capital, and what he means by that is that they take things from the Christian worldview and help themselves to it. Let me give you an example that he pointed out. I believe that evil provides evidence that there's a God. I don't think evil provides evidence against God. I think that evil is actually evidence that there is a God. Let me explain why. What is evil? If you were going to give a good definition of evil that covers all the cases, here's a good definition of evil. Evil is when things aren't the way they're supposed to be. Now that presupposes that there is a way things are supposed to be. And that makes a lot of sense if there's a designer. But if you don't have a design, like, can you have a bad carburetor? Yeah. Or can you have a really bad computer? Yeah. What does it mean to say your computer is messed up? Well, it's not working the way it's supposed to. What does that mean? It's not working the way it was designed to work. And so Dawkins is helping himself to evil without telling us how there could be such a thing in a completely naturalistic world. Look, if God doesn't exist and the natural world is all there is, things just happen, that's all. The question is, why is there evil? Why not? How could there be such a thing as evil, is the point. So I think what you have to do is to actually have eyes to notice when that's happening and ask somebody, well, you seem to be assuming that there's objective right and wrong. On your view of the world, where did that come from? How could there be such a thing? That's a real legitimate thing to do. Over here.
In regards to the 3 kinds of knowledge,
yes.
I was wondering, in the Bible it refers to the gift of knowledge, and I'm wondering if the 3 types of knowledge are the components of the gift of knowledge, or is it a separate thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that the three kinds of knowledge that I've laid out would be just general abilities that humans have to know things. I think the spiritual gift of knowledge is actually kind of more like a gift of discernment, an ability to discern spirits and things of that sort. That would be my general take on that. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding the definition that you gave for what truth is. You said that truth, if I'm not mistaken, is the unity of thought and reality. Now, I might perceive the stool you're sitting on is brown, but the reality is green. So, though I might think and perceive that the stool is, I'm making a thought of reality. It's true that the stool is green. So, shouldn't what is true be independent of what the thought is, and what is true is actually reality?
Yeah, truth is independent of your thinking isn't what makes it true. Reality is what makes it true. So here you have larger than. You have a podium and a wristwatch, and then the larger than relation, okay? Now here you have truth, and you have two things that are related by truth. One of them is the truth bearer, and the other is the truth maker. Truth bearer is a thought or a belief or a proposition or an assertion. The truth maker is reality. So something isn't true because I think it. It's true because reality matches it. So if the stool were green and I thought it was brown, I might take my thought to be true, but my thought wouldn't be true because the truth maker, the stool's color, wouldn't match, my thought doesn't match reality. So there's a sense in which a thought is relevant and a sense in which it isn't relevant. It is relevant because you can't have truth without the two things to stand in a relationship to each other, but it isn't thinking something that makes it true, it's whether the object is really that way. So I think that would be a way to clarify that. Yes, sir?
Why do you believe that abstract objects exist, and did God create them?
Yeah, I have a lot of reasons why I believe abstract objects exist. For example, it doesn't make any sense to say where is the number 2 or how big is it. That just seems like a nonsense question to me. And you take a unity of any class. Take the unity of the class of red things. There has to be something that unifies that class. And I would say it's something all members of the class have in common, redness itself. And the same would be for the class of humans. They would have humanness itself. The same for the class of all triangles. They would have triangularity in common. And I take those objects to be incapable of being given spatial descriptions in terms of size or shape. So the unity of natural classes is best explained by abstract objects. And there are other reasons. I wrote a whole book on this. The book is called Universals. It's published by McGill-Queen's Press, interestingly enough. Good Canadian press. Did God create them? Yes and no. God didn't create them, if you mean by that, bring them into existence. But there's a deeper way in which God created them, in the sense that he sustains them in existence and does so necessarily. So I see them as dependent on God's will in sustaining them in being, but I see it as the fact that he necessarily sustains them in existence. Come back at me now if that's not helpful. Did you want to say something else?
That'll do for now. Thanks.
Okay, all right. No, that's fine, thanks. Thank you. All right.
This might be an easy answer that I just didn't pick up on, but is the presupposition of the existence of the soul fundamental to the claims you were making about the refutation of physicalism and a posteriori truths?
Well, that's easy for you to say, let me tell you. No. Yeah, the existence of the soul is not a presupposition for a priori knowledge. Now, I think that the only way you could have a priori knowledge is if you're a soul. If you're your brain, I don't think a priori knowledge would be possible. Basically, here's why. If you believe you're a brain, then knowledge is going to be reduced to a physical causal interaction with the object. Light waves bounce off of it, they go through the atmosphere, and they interact with my retina and spark certain neuronal network firings in my brain. That's what it is to know this. Now, a priori knowledge involves knowledge of an object that you can't have a causal interaction with because the objects, like mathematical objects, aren't in space and time. Therefore, you can't stand in a causal relation to them. It follows that if we can have a priori knowledge, it can't be reduced to a physical causal chain between the brain and the object. If there is such a thing as a priori knowledge, then I would have to be something other than a brain, namely a soul. So the soul is not it's an ontological presupposition, but it's not epistemologically. You can argue for it from a priori knowledge. Now, come ask the other part of your question about consciousness, or. Okay, yeah, I don't take the soul to be a presupposition, by the way. I think there are reasons to believe in the soul. And I actually think we're aware of our souls. I think I'm actually aware of me occasionally. So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, I have two questions really quickly. The first question, just to make sure that my second question isn't misconceived. When we argue for objective morality, am I correct in thinking that the argument is basically that it is properly basic? It is a properly basic belief?
The existence of objective morality is self-evident. It's intuitively obvious.
Okay.
So whether you take it as properly basic or not is a different question. But let's grant that it's properly basic for the sake of argument.
Okay, this is really embarrassing because I've just heard properly basic, but I don't actually know what it really means.
Yeah.
So could you explain that to us? What is properly
No,
basic?
I won't. Okay, yes, sure. It's my birthday, I'll do anything I want. Certain beliefs are based on other beliefs. Like my belief that water has a certain structure is based upon my beliefs about hydrogen and oxygen. Those beliefs are based on other beliefs, but you can't go forever. So you end up with beliefs that you're rational in holding that aren't based on any further beliefs. They're basic beliefs, and properly so. Now, it doesn't follow that those beliefs aren't based on something else. They're just not based on other beliefs. For example, they might be based on experiences. So let's take my belief that my tie is colored. That's a properly basic belief for me. That's not based on any other beliefs I have. But it is grounded in an experience I have of seeing, by knowledge, by acquaintance, the color. So moral beliefs, if they're properly basic, would be beliefs that we have that aren't based on further beliefs. You don't derive them from deeper beliefs you know, but I do think we know certain things are right by experience. We're intuitively aware of their rightness or wrongness. It's very difficult to look at a little baby and to think and when you have a little baby in front of you, and to think it would be perfectly fine to rip its eyes out of its head. That's a hard thing to choke down. So there's an awareness there of preciousness, I think. Now, was that the second part of your question, or?
Yes and no. I'm just thinking the argument for the objective morality, it almost seems like it's ad populum. What am I missing here? And I'll just leave it at
Well, given that there's morality, the question can be raised. For example, I might go into my daughter's home and I might see a toy on the sofa. And it's properly basic for me that the toy's there because I see it. But I could still raise the question, how could there be such a thing as a toy on there? And it might be that my grandson put it there, or my daughter didn't put it away or something. So the same question is, given that I know this objective morality, it's still a legitimate question to ask, where did it come from? How could there be such a thing in the first place? And it doesn't come from clouds of electron gas. Matter doesn't belch out moral values. You can't rearrange matter according to the laws of chemistry and physics and get moral values popping into existence. So it makes more sense to believe they came from a good moral commander that has character than that they came from just matter or from the Big Bang or something of that sort. So that's the question. And I'm not appealing to popular opinion in knowing that there's moral right or wrongness. It's self-evident, just like 2 and 2 is 4. I would claim it's a self-evident claim. Hello.
I wanted to ask you a question about religious pluralism.
Yes.
Judaism used to be the 5th largest religion in the world. Now Sikhism is about 24 million of them, and over 250,000, I believe, are in the Fraser Valley. In witnessing to them in the last few years as I've been studying their religion, and as I talk to them, they keep saying, Ik Onkar, God is one. And of course, they hold to a monistic view like Hinduism. And when I want to say, well, which one? And so they also say all religions are different paths to the same one God. Okay? And when they say that, of course, they're holding to the religious pluralistic view, right?
Right.
But a few minutes into the conversation, I would say, well, what do you do with Jesus, who claimed, like in John 14:6, to be the only way, the truth, and no man comes unto the Father but by him? Well, when I say that, they generally get indignant, intolerant, upset, and don't want to talk anymore. What would be the best answer I would come back with as a response? Should I say, well, wait a minute, you just told me it was true. Why are you getting upset? How would you respond?
Yeah, I think that I would use, first of all, a parable. The mother illustration is what I like to call it. And I've used this in non-Christian audiences, but I've asked a young man to describe my mother. And he gave it a shot and said she's 5 feet tall, weighs 100 pounds, and has blonde hair. And then I asked another gentleman, and he said 5'4", 120 pounds, brown hair. Third guy, 5'7", 140 gray hair. Now I said, you can't all be right. She can't be 5 feet tall, 5'4", and 5'7" at the same time, etc. And I said, sir, you can believe with all your heart that my mom's 5'4", to the point that you can raise money and go to the world and recruit missionaries to persuade 500 million people that my mom's 5'4", and it doesn't make any difference if she's 5'7". And so the point is that contradictory beliefs can't all be true. Now, the statement God is one would not be bought by Buddha because Buddha was an agnostic. He didn't believe in a God. Popular Hinduism says there are 330 million religions, so aren't they doing to them the same thing that they claim you're doing to them? Now, namely, they're disagreeing with Hinduism when they say there are 330 million gods. So, furthermore, they're disagreeing with you in the same way you're disagreeing with them. You think that their view, that God is one and all roads lead to God, is wrong. They think you're wrong, that Jesus Christ is the only way. What's the difference? I don't get it. You both are. So after telling the parable, I would say to them, look, sometimes the most loving thing that you can do for someone is to engage in civil discussion where you hear one another out and agree to disagree if you have to. And in my view, there's a medicine that I found that I think is true that people need. And I'd like at least to have a chance to present what I believe to you, and I'd be willing to listen to you present what you believe to me. And if we differ, at least we've heard each other. Apart from that, there's very little you can do. Tough question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So my question comes from Sam Harris's book, and he has a quotation that where my question comes from. He says, moderates in every faith are obliged to listen.
Say it again. I can't understand you.
Yeah, he says, moderates in every faith are obliged to loosely interpret or simply ignore much of their canons in the interest of living in the modern world. So basically, the question is, do we cherry pick our Bible to fit our culture?
Yeah, I think we do. I don't think we should, but I think we all have a tendency. The reason is because we want people to like us. And I don't like people not to like me. So, it's easy for me to want to negotiate and to compromise and to cherry pick so people will like me. I don't want to do that, and I try not to. And that's why I need other brothers and sisters to keep me, strong in that way. But yes, we tend to. but we want to be careful and not do that sort of thing. So, I mean, I think not all examples of understanding the scriptures in a way that isn't historically the way the church has understood it is an example of cherry picking, however. There are things we've learned about the scriptures that have helped us maybe come up with new information about it, and that the church was wrong in its interpretation of it. There are examples of that. Now, I'm always cautious to take an interpretation of the scriptures that hasn't been held throughout the history of the church. But I don't want to hold the history of the church as an inerrant authority. I want to admit that they got it wrong, though that carries weight with me. So yeah, I do think we have an inclination to do that. Yes?
Okay, I'm going to try.
You're doing well.
Thank you. It's going to go back to the question somebody asked us earlier about truth, the
Yes.
relationship between thought and reality.
Okay.
So it's this, this philosophy, I guess, out there. So I say the bench is brown. That's my thought.
Is the bench brown?
And, well, what do you think?
You're wrong.
What color is the bench?
It's green.
Well, how do you know that's true?
I can see it.
But I decided brown because for me that's brown.
Well, you're
you're
play acting.
No, but I really believe it's brown.
No, well then you're wrong.
But there's some that take that stance. But I think
Well, then they're wrong. I mean,
I think you're wrong.
I'm sorry.
I think you're wrong.
Well, I'm sorry.
I'm not playing.
Yeah, no, I know you are. And I would say, well,
Or the saying as how do we know we're here?
How do we know we're
How
here?
do we know we're here? You know
What do you mean? What do you mean by here?
I mean, how do you know you even exist?
What do you mean? What do you mean by exist?
I mean, how can you tell?
No.
you're
What?
physically
No. You're
in
jumping.
space?
How do you? No, please slow down.
Okay.
Because when people start doing this, you have to slow them down.
Okay.
So you said, how do you know you exist?
Yes.
What do you mean by exist?
How do you know you're
Now, I didn't ask you how I knew I existed.
Oh, okay.
I'm asking you what you meant by a word in your sentence.
Okay.
Because you used a word.
All right.
And I would like to know what you meant by that word. You used the word exist. What does that mean?
Exist means to be.
How do you know that?
Well, how do you know that?
You're the one who said it. I didn't. You're the one who said it. You're the one who said it. Here's what I'm.
To argue it, I want to know how to.
That's and I'm doing. So here's what I'm doing.
So to exist is to be.
Well,
how
that's
do you
just,
know you are?
that's not what existence is. That's just another word. It's just another word for exist. All you did was come up with another word that's
so
synonymous with it.
define exist.
Well, you don't have to, but here's what.
I don't think I can actually.
Well, I can do it for you, but I won't. But here's what I'm doing. Well, to exist, my view of existence is the having of properties. If something has attributes, it exists. If it doesn't have attributes, it doesn't exist. But here's the point I'm trying to make. When a person starts doing that, they're usually using things like our brother back here talked about borrowed capital in the raising of their question. So you say that you think that this is green, or you said this is brown. I would ask you what you mean by brown. And eventually you're going to have to come up with a way that you learned what brown meant. And you're going to have to point to an example of brown in order to tell me what brown meant. So I'm going to conclude that therefore you know the difference between brown and green in order for you to even ask your question. So what I'm going to try to do is to show that before you can play the skeptical game, you have to assume some things that your own skepticism won't let you assume.
Okay, so I learned that color right there is brown. No, but I learned that color right there is brown. But I think that's what he was getting to, that relationship of what I think and believe. And so I'm persuaded that color is brown.
Well, would you be willing to
admit it was green?
Would you be willing to admit there's a difference between being persuaded that something's true and the thing really being true? Would you be willing to admit there's a difference between those?
Yes.
So we can all be persuaded that something's true.
Yes.
And we could be wrong. So what you're attacking is not my definition of truth. You're attacking whether in this case I know I have the truth, and that's a different question. The question of what truth is a metaphysical question. The question of how you know there's truth, that you have the truth, is an epistemological question. And the way I know I have truth here is I can look at it and see it. Now, the fact that you don't know it's true doesn't cut any ice with me, because I know what color it is. Furthermore, we could ask a whole bunch of other people, and I could show that you're colorblind or something of that sort.
No, I think it's cultural. They all think it's green.
Now, why would you? thinks it's culture. We'll ask some people from some other cultures. Which is where we're going to send you in a minute. All right, go ahead. That was good. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering how you convince a philosophically literate person why you would believe in the existence of a mind independent from any physical object.
Why I would believe in a mind independent of any physical object?
Yeah, like, like God, for example, he exists independent.
Well, first of all, I believe I have a mind, and that's independent of any physical object.
Yes, and I was just wondering why you believe that was true.
Well, because I'm aware of myself, and I'm aware that I have properties that my brain and body don't have. So, for example, if you were to split my brain in half and take half my brain away, my brain would be 50% there, but I wouldn't be 50% there. I'd still be a whole person. That's number one. Number two, I have free will. Occasionally, I act freely. If I weren't a mind, if I were my brain, my actions would be determined by the laws of chemistry and physics, and there'd be no freedom, because all material objects are determined by natural law. So if I were not a mind, I would be determined in my behavior, not responsible for it. Here, I could keep going. Here's another reason why I know that I'm a soul. I have a property that my brain doesn't have. Namely, I am possibly disembodiable. Life after death is possible for me. Maybe not real. Maybe there's no life after death. But at least I'm the kind of thing that could exist in an afterlife. When I hear near-death stories about people surviving death, even if I think they're all false, I admit that they at least could be true. And that's all I need to establish I'm not my body. Because there's one thing I know for sure about my brain and body, namely, they're not even possibly disembodiable. So there's something true of me, I'm possibly disembodiable, that's not true of my brain and body, so I can't be my brain and body. Now, suppose I were able to give you some more. Now I know what a mind is in my own case. I am a mind. And there is evidence in the creation that a mind stood behind it. For example, there are all kinds of design that are best explained by a mind standing behind that design than randomness or the laws of nature. An illustration of that would be the discovery of information. The SETI research project is looking for information in outer space. And they make the assumption that they will know an intelligent mind is behind that information because information only comes from mind. And I would think that's right. But guess what? Guess what is filled with living things are filled with? DNA is filled with information. So the most reasonable explanation is that. Then I could go to the beginning of the universe, and the universe. How did the universe begin? And we could keep having conversations about those things. Those would be suggestions of things I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for asking. Yes, sir. Or yes, ma'am. Sorry, I just can't see.
Okay. What is your definition of spiritual warfare, and what do you believe our role is in it as Christians?
A spiritual warfare is the conflict that is going on between the members of the kingdom of darkness and the members of the kingdom of God. So it is a conflict where the members of the kingdom of darkness are trying to undermine and thwart the movement of the kingdom of God. So it is a conflict between good and evil, between the two kingdoms. It's a clash of kingdoms. Our role in it is to weigh in on the side of goodness. And so the first thing that we try to do is to weigh in on the side of being truthful and good and fight evil wherever we can. And so by trying to thwart evil in the workplace, by trying to thwart evil in our communities, we're weighing in on the side of the kingdom against the kingdom of darkness. There's also the need to engage in demonic deliverance directly. I believe in that. And I also believe a third component, like I said, is dealing with the ideas that are involved in that struggle. So we have a lot of raising children to fear God and to love Him as a way of fighting spiritual warfare, for example, because you're weighing in on the side of the kingdom. Did you have something else you were thinking about that was behind your question that I might have missed?
I was just wondering what your understanding of it was, because the way you were speaking made it seem like it was more of an intellectual thing instead of a spiritual.
Oh, no, it's both. Well, to me, the intellectual is spirit. Here's spiritual, and one part of that's intellectual. So I don't say it's either spiritual or intellectual. I see the intellectual as a part of the spiritual, so that the intellectual struggle is a part of spiritual warfare, but it goes far more beyond than just that. far more beyond than just that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
How do you know if there's something that's absolute? There are things in which people used to believe that's absolute, that's not anymore. For example, slavery, racism, and the sun goes around the earth. How do we know that the things we believe as absolute now will stay true in regardless to space, time, and culture?
Well, your argument assumes that because I've been mistaken in the past, that's good reason to think that I'm mistaken now. And I don't buy that argument. From the fact that people have been mistaken, it doesn't follow I've got good reason to be mistaken now. So the error raises the possibility I'm wrong, but it doesn't give me a good reason currently for thinking I am wrong. In the cases where people were mistaken about moral views in the past, the moral law itself has corrected those mistakes. In fact, it's the very knowledge of the moral law itself that has not been corrected that allowed us to discern that that was aberrant. So the very fact that we were able to judge that these were errors presupposes the very thing the argument is trying to undermine, namely knowledge of objective moral law. So that would be the way I would argue it. And again, I would say that from the fact that I might be mistaken, it doesn't follow that I've got good reason to think I am. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm going to try to be clear with this question. It pertains to objective moral law and stuff. Like, as we've been over at length, the average atheist would just say, oh, good and evil, these things are all relative. So they have their axis upon which goodness hinges, and that's just relativity, whatever goes. And it seems, at least in my worldview, the axis of goodness is God himself, being an absolute and necessary being. From there flows goodness. But I'm left with a dilemma in that I don't think God could possibly be evil, in that, like, loving your neighbor, not killing innocent children, and these sorts of things are good, and God could never do them. Or he could never be evil. God couldn't be evil. So I'm left with the difficulty of wondering, like, does then good and absolute morality precede God? Like, if God cannot do evil, and God couldn't make, like murdering somemean, that define that as a good thing, then does the good necessitate God, or does God? I don't know.
There's another alternative, and that is that goodness is rooted in God's nature. So it's not arbitrary. It's not just he doesn't flip a coin and say, oh, I think I'll make torturing babies bad. It's not arbitrary, and nor is it some standard outside of him, but the moral law flows from within him, namely his character. So it's the commands of a good being that is the root of the moral law. So the moral law is rooted in God as a necessarily good being. So the morality flows from his character, not his will, and it isn't outside of him.
That's the way I see it, but I just wish I could define it better, and that it still seems like the good, it almost is something outside of God. Like there's God, and then there's goodness.
Think of it like this. This might be helpful to you in talking to people. It is easier to get agreement about who are good people than it is what are the right moral rules. So, for example, in our neighborhoods, we all know people that are really heroic and character-filled. That teacher that labors for very little pay at the school for hours because she loves her students. So what I'm suggesting is that people really, even if they claim relativism, it's easier to get agreement when it comes to identifying people of character. Now, what people of character tend to generate is goodness. And people with bad character tend to generate evil and vice. Well, in the same way, God generates goodness because it flows from his character, but there's nothing unusual about that. That's the way we are. So I would just say that God generates goodness because he starts with a good character. Now, goodness is maybe this will help, and then I'll move on. Goodness is, in my view, a property of God's. It's an attribute that God has. Other things can have that attribute. So God isn't alone the only thing with that attribute, though he has it to a perfect degree that other things don't have, but other things can have the attribute of goodness as well. So he isn't the only thing with the attribute, but he's the source of it.
It does help. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got another follow-up question to the questions about truth.
Yes.
So truth is the relationship between thought and reality. Jesus himself said he was the truth, the way, truth, and life.
Yes.
So, in which way then is Jesus the truth? Is he this relationship, or is he actually referring to reality, or what?
Well, when Jesus says, I'm the life, he can't be life. He's not life. I mean, life is a process that goes on that keeps you living. I mean, if you think Jesus is the same thing as life, you're a pantheist. Jesus, when he says, I am the life, he means that he is the source of life. He is not the same thing as life, or else me being living would be Jesus in me, and that's not, it's my heart beating and things of that sort. So when Jesus says, I am the life, he's saying he's the source of life. Now, when he says, I'm the truth, he either means he's the source of truth, that's maybe what he means, or he might mean he's the truth maker. And here's why that might be the correct interpretation. He may be saying this: here's a picture of the Messiah as he would come in the Old Testament, and all these other guys didn't match that. They were imposters, but I match it. I'm the real one. I'm not a phony. I'm the real Messiah. I'm the thing that corresponds to the prophecies that would come. I'm the real deal. So either he's saying I'm the source of truth, or he's saying he's the truth maker that matches the true propositions in the scripture about what the Messiah would be when he came. One of those two. Let's do some more here. Okay, yes, sir.
I just want to thank that fella for asking my question, and thank you for being here tonight. But then I would then ask, how do we understand the in him we live and move and have our being then? So being the question, what is truth versus who is truth?
Yeah.
You answered that.
Okay, the statement in him we live and move and have our being, I take to be a statement of God's imminence rather than his transcendence. He's both. He transcends the world, he's not the world, but he's present all within the world. And so we literally live within him in the sense that he is near and not far off, and we actually move within him. He's not distant, he's near. We live our lives within him. And so in him we live and move and literally have our being, that we live our lives in such a way that God is not on Mount Olympus, a long way away, and we've got to go give a sequence to him. Instead, he is imminent and near, and we live in front of him and in his very presence all the time. That's how I would think that. Thank you, folks.